Now let's look at vectors in details, because vectors are not very simple in terms of what they are or in terms of how they actually exist in nature. Okay? So vectors are represented by arrows. Okay? So if your physical quantity is, let's say, force, so you use the physical quantity F for force for the vector, and then we actually draw an arrow on top of it to represent that. Not like mass. For example, if you want to represent mass, you will just be using, for example, a scalar quantity. Okay? If you want to use mass, you just put m. And there's no other way to quantify it. For vectors, since it means direction, okay, a physical quantity that gives direction, so we usually put f, or an arrow, to say, that quantity is a vector. So displacement is d, and then an arrow on top. Okay? That's for how we represent vectors. Another way to represent vectors is basically, if you're typing it, is to use boldface. Okay? So, how do we do that here? So, if we're going to type vectors, I think in your book you can see that, no? That vectors are represented by a boldface letter with an arrow on top, and the scalar is represented by a regularly typed letter. Okay? So that's how we represent vectors. They're quite special. So hindi siya ganun kadali rin as in terms of their operations and representations. So when you draw vectors, basically we use arrows. Okay? So an arrow, the length of the arrow tells us about how big or the magnitude of that vector. And then where the arrow is pointing tells you the direction of that vector. Okay? So here, displacements A and A prime are equal because they have the same length and direction. So they're going to the same direction. They have the same length if you look at their length. So basically, these two vectors are equal. Okay? So how do you know that? You get a ruler and measure their length. Okay? And displacement B has the same magnitude as A but opposite in direction. So B is a negative of A. So when we put a negation on a vector, basically that's when the direction just flips. Okay? So at once it goes here, and because it's a negative decision, it goes other way around. Okay? It has a 180-degree turn. Okay? That's for vectors.